Thank you for inviting me here today. Just kind of a prior warning. So I'm not a finance person at all. So this will be a bit different flavor of talk, but it has some finance aspects to it you might find interesting. So the title is Picking Winners from Venture Capital to Fantasy Sports. Okay. So to begin the talk, why don't we just play like a small game? Might be kind of fun, right? So here are 5 different companies, and these are companies founded back in 2011. Okay, so if you're a venture capital investor, they might approach you, and they say, invest in us, give us like 100,000 or $500,000 to get it started, and you want to pick the right company because if the company has some kind of exit, has like an IPO or acquisition, you could make a lot of money. In VC space, you can make maybe 100 or 1,000 times your investment, which is a crazy return on investment, like 1,000% or 100%, right? So, 5 companies. So, how about for fun, like somebody volunteers to play VC and just pick a winner there? Who do you think is going to be like the winner amongst the 5 companies? Any volunteers? Just guess. Yeah, just pick one. All right, but you got a point there, right? There's not much information there. So just the logo and the name isn't enough to like make a decision, although I feel like sometimes that happens. So I'll give you a bit more data. So how about maybe the sector of the company, like this is a computer vision company, the top school, so the founders went to a top school defined by US News World Report, like a top 20 school. They have a PhD, their age, previous experience, like maybe they have a company from before, okay? So this is the kind of data you can actually learn about a company when it's founded, okay? And now you're the VC, and now you got to make a choice. So, want to make a guess? Just for fun. No pressure. There's no money on the line here. So. Okay, so you chose Nutanix, okay? All right, so let's fast forward like 7 years and see what happened. Hey, you're a winner. So you would have made, right? So the company IPO'd, I think 2016 or something, and yeah, the IPO for $2.5 billion. You would have made about 100 times your investment if you were the seed round funder of the company, okay? So this is what a venture capital is doing in their job. They're basically looking at companies like this kind of information, right? And they're kind of manually just trying to pick someone to invest in, okay? So it turns out for like VC firms, the typical number is like 31%. Like that's the kind of return a VC firm makes typically. However, most of the time they're losing money. So like 80% of the investments or 90% are actually losers. They make you nothing or they lose you money. 5 to 10% have like this 10 to 20x return. They do okay. And then there's 1% that are like super successful, like Facebooks and those kind of companies. They give you above 100x. Those are the winners, okay? Okay, so how does a venture capitalist today make that decision to figure out which one to invest in, right? And it turns out the way they kind of do it is kind of like the show Shark Tank. Like literally they'll talk to the founder, they'll sit down, see what they're up to, and kind of like make a gut decision of how they do this. And how do I know this? I actually, in the course of research, talked to people working in venture capital, and they told me, yeah, our whole field is very, very qualitative. We just like kind of go with gut feeling and instincts and maybe networks, like we know the person or something like that. It's not really quantitative at all, which kind of surprised me because it's an industry that is designed to disrupt. Like they invest in companies that use big data and analytics to like disrupt like, advertising or taxis or whatever they do, right? But internally, right, they don't disrupt themselves. So that has to come from outside. So quantitative approach. Is anybody trying to do this in a quantitative way? So first, let's talk about the scholars. So the academics, what are they up to? And really, like looking around, there isn't much we found that was really hardcore quantitative. The best was actually my colleague Scott Stern at MIT and his co-author Jorge Guzman wrote a paper back in 2015 that showed that certain features about the company had some correlation with success. So the company's location, oddly enough, the company's name had an effect on this, the founder's experience, stuff like that. So it's kind of like saying this thing will like increase the chance a company will be successful, or these companies are successful have these correlations in these certain features. But other than that, like there's no paper like saying let's go from like end to end, like let's take the raw data and then do some machine learning or something, right, some modeling, and then build a portfolio and then see how the portfolio does in the market. Like if you had this portfolio, would you have made money? Just like in the first part of the talk. That didn't really exist in the literature, okay? So that's the scholars, kind of like a gap there in like what's done so far. How about the dollars, okay? So actual VC firms, is anybody out there using quantitative methods to actually build these portfolios? And there's a few out there. So there's Correlation Ventures, Signal Fire, Google Ventures. These are companies claiming they use quantitative methods to actually pick who to invest in. Now, what are they doing? I don't exactly know because they're not going to tell me, obviously, right? But there are not many players. These aren't like the big players in the VC space that you've heard of. And it's started to happen there, and I don't know how successful they are. Like, they haven't reported some amazing success. So it's a question mark if what they're doing is really super quantitative and if it even works, okay? So kind of a question mark there. It may work, it may not work. So I can't tell you about what they do. So the best I can do is tell you what I'm going to do. So today, I'm going to show you folks new kinds of data about startups. Not really new in the sense that it's like wasn't known before. It's just that I'm going to show you how to collect it in one big pile, okay? Then I want to show you a model we cooked up in my group to model how a startup succeeds. It's totally like a made up fake model, but it turns out actually for building portfolios, it works pretty well. And then finally, we'll talk about this way to build a portfolio, this picking winners approach to building a portfolio. It's slightly different from like typical portfolio theory, and it's kind of a fun algorithm there. Okay, so let's begin by talking about the data we use for this study. So the data came from 3 sources: Crunchbase, LinkedIn, and PitchBook. So Crunchbase, if you've heard of this company, it's kind of like a Wikipedia for startups. So if you're a startup company, you go to Crunchbase, create an account, then you upload data about your company. So who your founders are, their LinkedIn pages, and then if you get like different funding rounds, you put the information there. I got a Series A this date, a Series B that date. You may or may not put the amount of money you got in the rounds. They usually don't put that money, but that's the kind of data I get from Crunchbase. So from there, crawling the whole thing, we get 83,000 companies, 50,000 investors, 150,000 investment rounds, 500,000 employees. Like it's a big, big pile of data. We managed to collect all that data. If you do it today, it's going to be a lot more expensive because Crunchbase is now a pay service. So around 2016, 17, they started charging for their data, but when we were doing our research, 2014, 15, it was the open platform. So we scraped the whole thing. I got a big file on my computer of like Crunchbase, their data. Now, this is self-reported, so I want to like verify this. So there's another company called PitchBook. That's a pay service. And these people actually have the same kind of Crunchbase data, but they kind of double check it to make sure it's legit, and they sell it to you. So when I asked them, can I get access to your data? They said, sure, we have an API you can kind of crawl to collect our data. I said, great, how much is that? They say it's about 5 figures, like $100,000. I said, oh, so I'm thinking their target market is like big VC firms, use the data for like making decisions. I said, I'm just an academic. Is there like a cheaper plan? They said, yeah, we'll give you like a 1 month's access to the web portal. It's a limited download ability. Like maybe you could download 1,000 things a week, which is not that much. That'll cost you like a couple thousand a month. I said, great, can I take that? But it's the middle of the month. Can I get it prorated? Like, yeah, okay, a few $100, give you like a week's access, or 2 weeks access. And then what we did was we realized, don't tell no one this, but the way the website's structured, it's like you click a search query and then they give the results page by page, right? And it's very well structured. It's company name, the company founder, the year it's founded, blah, blah, blah. So if you just take a picture of it, like a screenshot, you have the information. And that's unlimited. So we basically I have a folder on my computer of like, 100,000 or 200,000 screenshots from PitchBook. So we got all that data there. And we use that just to verify the Crunchbase data. So some more clever data hacking we did there. So we have that data. Finally, this is the trickiest one to get, is the LinkedIn data. So LinkedIn, we have in our data set that we're going to use for the study, 200,000 names have to collect the information for. And LinkedIn is really like strict about getting their data. So you start like crawling their through the list of names, collecting the profiles. At some point, they block your IP address, right? And they're really they don't like you taking their data. So we found a way around this. I think my student actually lived near MIT. So in the winter break, when no one is on campus, he logged into like 60 computers in the computer cluster, and had it running like different chunks of the list for like a couple days. So we got that whole thing collected with what I call street hacking, like just go in there and log in everywhere. So yeah, so now we got all these like LinkedIn profiles for all these people. So at this point, we have this incredible data set about startup companies, like all their information and their founders and everything. And now we begin trying to understand that there are patterns in there we can use to actually predict who's going to succeed, who's going to win. Okay, so our data is going to come from companies after 2000. We chose like a cutoff date to do our analysis. So that brings us down to about 24,000 companies for analysis. And here's the number of companies by round, or by year, when they're founded, just to kind of see some patterns here. So like, this is the year that Crunchbase got founded. So companies begin uploading into the system here. And then this is when we got their data back in 2016. Yeah, near the end of 2015 actually is when that happened. So that's why this drops off here. It's like, it's the middle of the year, so maybe there are more companies founded afterwards, but we didn't collect those for the study. What is the raw data? It's like here's some companies like Twitter, Yelp, Facebook, Etsy. This is the year they got funding rounds. So in venture capital, the funding round is they're called alphabets. So Series A, Series B, Series D, E, F, and then exit. Exit means you got acquired or had an IPO. Exit means you won. You're a winner. Okay? So we get the dates of these different funding rounds for the companies. It's kind of cool to look at here, based upon the year you're founded, what fraction of companies had like a huge success, had an exit. So the yellow color means some kind of exit, acquisition, IPO. You note that in the later years, there's not many exits. That's not because the companies got worse. It's because there's a censorship bias, right? It takes a couple of years to exit. So this is like censoring bias. In the beginning, there's also like less companies there. There, I think it's like a bias that maybe certain companies weren't reporting their data in the system, right? Because it's before Crunchbase existed. So we get all kinds of biases in our data. So this data is not perfect, not ideal, got all kinds of problems with it, but it's the data we got to work with, so we got to kind of deal with that. Okay, so we'll try to like use this data to try to predict who's going to be a winner in the future. Here's kind of a bar plot of the time to get to different funding rounds to give you a sense of the time scale. So Series B, about 2 years, C, 4 years, D, 6 years, kind of goes up. IPOs happen about 6 years, right? Acquisitions are faster. They're about 3 years. Now, you might be concerned now because I'm saying winning is this or this, but they're different, right? They're clearly different. So yeah, that's true. So my model is going to be imperfect, but we'll see if it actually can predict winners. And if you're really thinking about it, probably you could take our model and improve upon it to get a more realistic model of what's happening in there. But we couldn't figure it out yet, so we just treat these as the same thing, even though they're kind of different. Okay. All right, so the data we get about the companies is the sector they're in. So on Crunchbase, there's 59 types of sectors. Here's a histogram of some of the more popular ones: software, mobile, healthcare. Right, these are like common companies in our data set. Here's a cool thing. So we can actually take a feature, like a sector, let's say biotech, and just look at all the companies in a given year that are founded, let's say 2011 companies, how far they get later on. So if you're not biotech, there's like 1% IPO, and if you are biotech, there's like 4%, right? So that kind of thing we can see in the raw data that biotech had a bit more IPO than non-IPO. Software, there's like 1% IPO for not software, and then 2% if you were software. So these are like kind of small things you see in the raw data. Next, we have data about what I call leadership. This is like the company's founders and people on their advisory board, things like that. And that information comes from LinkedIn. So that's like your previous experience. Like, did you found a company before? Did the company have an IPO before? Your education, your major, your age, we can figure out kind of, like when you graduate, we think you're 21, and then we can figure out how old you are from that approximation. So a noisy signal, but good enough. What are some things here? Well, here's a big one. So if the founder of your company had an IPO before, you get like, half of the stuff is like a winner. And if you didn't have an IPO, it's like a much smaller fraction. This is a fact venture capitalists know. Like if you had a previous IPO, right, then they're gonna like bet on you and you probably have another IPO again. That's like what they know in the industry, kind of qualitatively. And we're seeing it here, this like raw data I collected. Here's one about education. So not from a top school, That's like a fraction IPOs, not too much. If your founder's from a top school, a little bit larger. So maybe there's some value in like higher education. Maybe, maybe not. This is just raw data. I'm not claiming anything here. Master's degree, no masters, no IPOs, masters, small fraction IPOs, right? Raw data stuff. Okay, the last kind of data we get is about the investors, because one thing I can tell is not only when you got the funding, but who gave it to you, like which VC firm gave it to you. So I have a network. I have a company, and I know who invested in them at different rounds, right? And I know the other companies that these investors are also involved with in my data set. So I have this kind of cool network of investors and the companies there. And I can make kind of cool features like, oh, in your neighborhood here, so like the other companies that are kind of like your brothers or sisters because they have the same investors, how many are there? Are you in a big family or small family? Or how many of them had an IPO or an acquisition? So do you have like smart siblings or dumb siblings, right? I can measure that kind of feature for my data. And by the way, this network is dynamic. Just want to emphasize that every edge here has a time on it. That investment happened at some date, right? So at different time steps, the feature value is going to be different. Yep. So like, for example, fraction of neighbors that are acquired. So how many of your neighbors, your fellow brothers or sisters, are like smart? They got an acquisition. So if less than half had an acquisition, you get like 1% IPO. And then more than half, actually there's no IPOs, but there's a bit more acquisitions, right? So there's some complex things happening in this data. I'm not clear if this feature is going to be super useful, but we can measure it for this data and we'll see what happens with it. Okay, so I'm measuring all this data, the funding rounds, the sector, the investor network, the leadership things. I'm going to impose what I call a no cheating condition. So whatever I talk about today, right, I'm going to ask, would that information have been available when deciding to invest in the company? So any feature I calculate is calculated with the data available the day the company's founded, not afterwards. So no cheating here, right? It's going to be like if you were the VC, this would be the data you have available to you to make the decision. Okay, so we're going to try to build portfolios of winners with this data. So the first thing we need is some kind of model that explains like how the company succeeds and how that relates to the things I can measure about the company when it's created, all those features I measured. So there's not really a model we found that's kind of really perfect for this kind of situation. So what we did was we just kind of made up a model, right? And maybe the model is kind of ridiculous, but it kind of works, so just bear with me. So what I observe about a company is when they get the funding round. So when you got founded, Series A, B, C, up to exit. Okay, I know the date, all that stuff happened. So we said, okay, that's what I can see, but in the middle here, I don't know what happens here, right, to this made-up time series I'm concocting here. So I just said, you know what, let's just put down some like diffusion, some Brownian motion there. And what I'm seeing is when you get a Series A, it's the first time this random walk hits that level. I call it delta there. Okay? And when you get Series B, it's the first time it hits 2 delta. So I space them apart linearly. Why? Why not? Right? I'm modeling here, so I made a choice. Okay? So linearly spaced levels for the different funding rounds. And the first time you hit it, that's when you get the funding. So that's called a first passage time in that probability world. Okay? So if it's a random walk describing the company, kind of like an invisible stock price, yeah, and the first passage time is when it gets the funding rounds, then how do I understand that random walk? And there's 2 things they have to understand about it. So it's got a drift. It kind of drifts in some direction. And it's got some diffusion or volatility, right? These are the 2 things characterize a random walk or a Brownian motion. So if I tell you what those things are, then I can figure out all like the probability to care about for this problem. So one important thing is that the model as it's stated here, right? Like if you have a slightly positive drift, eventually you're going to have an exit, right? It might take a while, but you know, eventually it's going to hit the level of like an exit. That's not true, right? Like most companies don't make it. And so to like model that phenomenon, we just said, you know what? Whatever this drift is, this diffusion is, those things, it can't go on forever. So it's got to slow down at some point. There's going to be some like inherent lifetime of the process after which it dies. Okay? Because if you haven't made it in like 20 years, you're not going to make it. Just give it up. It's over. Okay? So the way we did that, we said, you know, for a fixed amount of time, new, those things are constant. The drift, the diffusion, they're like constant. And then after a fixed amount of time, it's going to drop off exponentially fast with a time constant tau. So I'm going to propose that model. What's new? What's tau? I don't know. The data's going to tell me what those numbers are. But I'm going to propose this structure on those things. Okay? Again, we're just like making up models here. We're having fun with it, me and my students. Well, hopefully it captures what's happening in the reality. Okay, next, the drift and diffusion. So here, pretty standard kind of parameterization. The drift is a linear function of the features. These coefficients are beta, right? They weight the features for the drift. For the diffusion, like the sigma squared equals a linear function of the features squared. So gamma kind of characterizes those like coefficients, the features for the diffusion. And one more thing we threw in there, just to make it even more fun, we said, you know what? Life is not the same. It's like not stationary. Things change. Let's allow some kind of like something to change over time. We said let's let that beta, so that thing in the drift, we'll let that be dependent upon the year you're in. So like beta today is like last year's beta plus some noise term. So like these betas can be different year to year, but kind of similar. We just threw that in there to make it a bit more flexible. Okay, again, we're just like proposing models, having fun here, right? Trying to understand what's going on there. But this is the basis of our model. Okay, so now the one theorem. By the way, not my theorem, so don't give me credit for this. This is standard stuff in any kind of probability textbook. Well, the nice thing about our model is that if we assume that, is this thing working? I guess you can't see that. So if the drift is a function of time, and the function is a constant, that beta x thing, times some time varying function f of t, I'm going to make the diffusion coefficient be like a constant sigma 0 squared times that same time function f of t. So like the drift and the diffusion, if I divide them, that's a constant. Okay? If I do that, then this equation here gives me like the probability density of those hitting times, those first passage times. Standard stuff, but it means that I can just write down my likelihood function of my data with that simple equation, just plugging in the data I have in my observations. So we have a nice, not simple, but closed form equation for our likelihood function. We plug this into our data and then like fit the model and see what happens. Okay, so we'll just like take our observations, maximize the log likelihood, standard ML estimation to get the model parameter estimates. We usually call the BFGS algorithm to do that. It's a quasi-Newton method. This is actually a big pile of data and a pretty messed up model, so we had to use this method to estimate it. It's a lot faster than standard first, second order methods. And their approach was just basically pick 100 random starting points, let the algorithm run, and then find the best like scoring parameter setting, and that became the model estimate. So that's how we estimate the model. Just standard kind of ML approach to things. Just find your best fitting thing. Okay, so now we can talk about, we have a model fit the data. All those betas and gammas are figured out. Now we talk about making that portfolio, that pick-in winners portfolio. Okay, so remember, if one company exits, I win. So if my entire portfolio fails, everything's garbage, but one of them is like Facebook, then I'm happy. That's all I care about. So it's a kind of it's a different mindset of like investing. Okay, so to make it more formal, if I let EI be the event that company I wins or exits, E for exit, but exit is winning, then what I'm trying to do really in this portfolio is I want to maximize the probability of the union of my events happening. So this means at least one company wins. So you get your whole portfolio, call it S, right? Somebody in S has an exit. Maximize that objective function. That's a bit different than like traditional like maximize means and minimize volatility. This is like almost like, if you look at it more in depth, you actually want to like maximize your volatility a bit. Have somebody kind of get in the outskirts there. Like you want a black swan to hit you so you can actually succeed here. So we're going to build portfolios with this kind of objective function. Now, you might be thinking that for your problem, right, where's like the money you put in and the returns of the companies? And the answer is, I don't really know what the money I put in is because I don't have access to that information. I don't know the multiplier I get. I know it's big, 100, 1,000, who knows? So instead of like kind of knowing the cost, like how it kind of increases, I just say, it's like nothing and then infinity. That's basically what this is doing. It's like saying your your reward is like 0 for a while, and then if you cross some threshold, it hits infinity. And because I don't know the details about like how much the gain is and all that kind of stuff, this is a good approximation to like what's happening out there. Okay. Okay, so this is the picking winners portfolio. I'm just trying to pick a winner out of the whole set of people. Okay, so picking winners, it's actually a pretty general way to look at things, and many problems fall under this kind of framework. So venture capital is a very natural place where you pick winners, right? You care about one thing being super duper successful, otherwise you don't really care. But there's other fun places where it pops up. So for instance, romance, right? You might date on a lot of dates, and all the dates are weird and awkward and whatever, but if you find that one true love, that's all that matters, right? You'll sacrifice all these boring dates for one like true love. So romance is like a picky winners kind of mindset. That's the way you should go into those kind of situations, right? Like, yeah, it'll probably be a boring date, but in the off chance it's a winner, that's all I care about. And also, fantasy sports is a place where picking winners is the right way to look at the problem. So if you'll allow me like maybe 3 minutes, I want to do a little diversion to like where this work began, because actually it didn't begin with venture capital. Like I'm not that smart and academic. I'm really just a compulsive gambler. So really the story begins with fantasy sports. Okay, so maybe 2 minutes diversion. It'll be fun. So there's this thing, daily fantasy sports is a situation where every day there's games being played in America, like baseball, American football, American basketball. And what you do is you pick a bunch of players, right? And if the players do well in real life, you get fantasy points. And then if you win the contest, say you have the highest scoring lineup in the contest of like 20,000, 30,000, maybe 100,000 people, you win a lot of money. So here's the one real contest in hockey. If it's $3 to enter, if you win, you get $4,000. Then if you're second place, 3,000, 2,000, it drops pretty fast, right? So like this kind of looks like a step function. So this is like the picking winners kind of reward function. You get nothing. Like if I come in the top 100, I make a dinky amount of money. But I'm really playing to win like first place. Like that's all I care about really. And so our picking winners idea came from like this space. And the company is called DraftKings. They're like the big American fantasy sports company. We tried to actually win these contests. That was our goal. And wrote a paper about it, nice little academic thing. It's a big old integer program. So if you study optimization, we solve a pretty simple integer program to build the lineups and create that portfolio of picking winners lineups. I won't go into the details of it here because it's not the topic of the talk. I wanted more like academic talk for like this audience, but yeah, that's what it is. But maybe the question if you want to ask me is, did it actually work? Could you actually win? And the answer is, of course we did. So November 15, 2015, we came in first place in a contest. The next day we came in second. And then the next day we came in third. And a few days later we were first place again. We're like winning these things a lot. And these are like big contests. There's like 30,000 people in the contest. And we have like 200 entries going in against 30,000, right? And we're winning consistently. So that was a 200 entries, right? A portfolio of 200 things going in there. And it was a lot of fun. We got to go to the football game. We met the CEO of DraftKings. That's their CEO there. That's my student, Scott Hunter. He's my PhD student, current MIT student. That's me, former MIT student, compulsive gambler. But we're living the big life, right? We're hanging out there, having a good time. And what's funny is at that game, right, the guy from the company, the VIP relation manager, said to me, oh, just so you know, tomorrow we're changing the policy. So it's no longer 200 entries, it's just 100. And I said, is that because of us? But no, it's not because of you. It's just a policy in the company being discussed for a while now. It's just going into effect tomorrow after we butter you up with like champagne and lobster rolls and VIP treatment. Whatever, in my mind, I broke DraftKings, so I feel good about that, right? Anyways, that was hockey. That's why we had our first couple of winnings. But there's other sports. So yeah, 200 to 100, that was the policy change. In baseball, I won $50,000 one night. Same algorithm, exact same thing, change a couple of parameters, and yeah. So I won a ton of money with this thing. So what happened was, I write the DraftKings paper before this happened. I show it to a colleague, and they basically were like not really happy with the work. So what happened was, oh yeah, one more thing. Football, I haven't won yet. I came in 23rd out of 500,000. Football, if I win, it's $1 million. So I'm still trying for that one, not there yet. Okay, so now it worked for sports. That was a lot of fun. But then how do I get the venture capital from that? So my colleagues, right? So I show them the paper. And they criticized it. They said, this is nice, but I want you to apply that picking winners thing to something more business-oriented. Yeah, because I'm in the business school, apparently. And the quote was, "We don't play games at Sloan." Like, he's in my office, yelling at me, pounding my table. "We don't play games at Sloan." I'm like, okay, I got it, right? Because here, senior faculty, I'm a junior guy. I don't want to, like, upset people, right? And so what happened was, because of that yelling I got in the summer, after I won $50,000, I had to apply this to venture capital, right? I was forced to apply it to something more business-oriented. So that's kind of how the genesis happened. Okay, it's fine, right? I'm a scientist, so if it worked there, it'll work here. We'll just try the same kind of philosophy. Different kind of models, right? That's different, but the philosophy is kind of the same. All right, so back to startups. That was the diversion, a little fun story about how this work began. But now we're back to like picking winners. So the picking winners portfolio. We got to build this thing, right? So here's how we'll do it. So I'm going to pick an observation date, T observation. Let's say it's December 31st, 2010, so end of the year 2010. All the data before that is my training data to fit the model, so I do that optimization. Estimate the model, and then I'm just going to use a model to actually maximize this objective on the companies founded in the observation year. So if the observation date's 2010, December 31st, then I'm basically betting on 2011 companies. And that's usually 1,000 companies I can pick from. Okay? Yeah, so solve this problem. So it turns out this objective function is actually what's called submodular. So you can estimate it, you can maximize it with a good performance bound using a greedy approach. And our approach was basically to evaluate this, just use a Monte Carlo simulation. Because remember, like I said, those betas change year to year, right? So I estimate the beta for 2010. 2011 is that beta plus some noise, right? And so I just kind of generate simulated betas with the noise distribution in check, and then average that to get the objective function. And what's important about that is that when I make the beta uncertain, it actually creates correlations. So imagine two companies and they're in ride sharing, okay? So I don't know the exact value of the coefficient. So I know that in 2011, they could have a lot of reward, like a big drift, because that's a high value that year, or it could be really small. Yeah, but they're going to do it together. So the fact I'm uncertain about the parameter value actually creates a correlation in my companies, and I can exploit that when I'm maximizing this to create a more diverse portfolio. Okay, so that's what the Monte Carlo simulation does. It kind of lets you model the correlations due to model uncertainty. And then we'll build a portfolio one at a time. So we'll basically have 1,000 companies. We evaluate everybody's probability of them winning, pick the best one. Then the next one, you basically get the probability of 2 of them winning with the previous one, pick the biggest one, throw it in there. So you're just checking 1,000 things, one at a time to build a portfolio of 10, 20, 30 companies. So very fast to run, easy to do, just check everything out using this greedy approach. Okay? And then we have our portfolios. So before showing you how they did, right, just some things about the model that are kind of interesting. So here I'm plotting on the estimated data, right, on the training companies, how those drift and diffusion kind of look for the different success levels, how far the company get and how is this drift and diffusion. If you look at the exit companies, what they have is they don't have that big a drift, but the model gives them a big diffusion, right? That's how it's fitting this data. It's giving those successful companies a higher diffusion value. What things increase those drift diffusion? So for non-sector data, things like executive acquisition, executive IPO. So people on your executive board had an acquisition, had an IPO, previous success. Those are making your drift bigger. And similar things for diffusion. Your job had an IPO, your previous founder. These are the kind of top scoring features in this space. For sector features, the top sectors in drift are e-learning, ride sharing, but they're much smaller values than the previous one. This is 0.18, this is 0.8. So this isn't playing a big role in the drift, but the diffusion actually had a bigger contribution, and the things that are giving it a big volatility was social media, messaging, social networks. So it's the kind of things the model's picking out from the data as it's trying to fit to it. Okay, so here's how we did. This is performance. So I'm plotting here is the portfolio size here, so how many companies I'm putting in the portfolio as I build it one at a time sequentially, and then how many exits I had, acquisition or IPO, amongst those companies I'm betting on. The green line is perfection. The green line means everybody you would bet on wins. Okay, so I can't beat that. The purple line here, that's random guessing. This is like the fraction of companies that are like exits in that data set. So I want to beat that, okay? The red dots here are actual venture capital firms that bet on companies that are in that year. So Founders Fund, Coastal Ventures, Greylock, Sequoia, all the big dogs you know about. If you notice, the red dots are kind of like, a couple are near the random line, so that's not so great. A few are above it, okay? And where do we come in? Well, we're the red curve. That's our fully, picking winners model, having all the correlations modeled in there. And, give you a number to put in your head. If we pick 10 companies to bet on, 6 of them had an exit. So we're getting 6 out of 10 with this approach in 2011 if I'd had the data and the brain back then to do this, yeah? Okay, so the blue curve here, in case you're wondering, this is when I treat the companies as independent. So that correlation induced by uncertainty, I don't model it in there explicitly. When I treat them as independent, I do worse actually. So having this correlation modeled in there makes you diversify a bit more and gives you a better performance. Okay, so maybe you're wondering, who are the companies that you actually picked? So who is our 2011 picking winners portfolio? Well, it's these companies here. This is our top 10 in the sequence at the end of the portfolio. So the best one, the next best one, etc. And of these 10, right, here are all the exits. Remember Nutanix, right? Remember you picked Nutanix? You picked them, so did the algorithm. So we could have had a good year back in 2011 if we had the algorithm. So not bad, right? 6 out of 10 is pretty good. I was very happy about that. 2012, similar kind of curve. So we're still beating the random guessing, and we're beating all the top VC firms. We have less now because it's 1 year later, so they need time to mature, right? So I think there's just a censoring bias here. We didn't wait long enough to see what's happening here. That's why there's less successes overall. But still, we're beating all the big dogs. Here's our portfolio in 2012, and this time, no IPOs, but a couple acquisitions. So yeah, it's tough to find IPOs, but still it's doing pretty good. Okay. How about 2018 portfolio? Maybe 2019? Well, I'm not going to tell you that part. I'm going to keep some things secret, right? Can't give everything away. But I kind of hope you feel I've shown you here all the tools you need and the data you need to actually do it yourself, right? This is, basically this work is to show that venture capital can be a little bit quantitative. It's not all just gut feeling. There's patterns in the data. There's enough data to actually make use of the patterns. Okay. So now my students actually want to take this thing and make money off it. So kids want to do. So we made a website called Picking Winners, and kind of the way it works is you go to the website and you just click some features about your company and the year it's founded, things like that, and we'll give you the score of the model for your company. So if you're a VC firm with a bunch of deals, you can upload all the features of the companies to the website. They'll give you back a portfolio, give you back the scores of the companies they're probably just exiting, all that kind of nice data for you to use when you make decisions of who to invest in. So yeah, it's pickingwinners.org. I think the site's running now, so if you want to go there and play with it, it's available there. And yeah, it's just a nice tool for people to play with the data and get some insights about the companies they're trying to invest in. This work got some press attention. It was kind of, I want to brag a little bit, not too much, but Wall Street Journal did a thing about us finding these home run exits. So they used home run, not winners. I didn't write the headline, so I didn't have a choice. But yeah, so it got some media attention. That was kind of fun. And yeah, so I think the slides are going to be distributed afterwards with attendees. So if you want the paper for venture capital, it's there. For the sports one is here. If you want to actually play the sports stuff, the code is here in GitHub. So I gave the code away for free because I'm like Prometheus. I take fire and give it to the people, right? I don't care about the money. I already won, so you can play if you want baseball. Although I think in England, it's illegal. This doesn't work in this country. So if you're from the States, it's okay. Or if you got a nice VPN, it's okay. But yeah, yes, I think here it won't be so useful. Yeah, and that'll be it. Thank you. So we got a few minutes for questions. Is that, yeah, okay, sure.
So it was exit defined to exit
In the mic.
Exit was defined to be exit in the next year, or?
The question is, did I define exit as exiting the following year? So nobody exits the following year, right? So exit means if I wait till the end of the universe, do you exit? And so that's why I use 2011, because we did the work in 2016, so you had 5 years to observe the companies.
And why in 2011 didn't you pick anyone from 2010?
Because in the venture capital game, when do you get the most bang for your buck? When you're like on the ground floor, Series A. So we're saying if I'm Series A, so if a company comes to me, a brand new company, and I want to like get in early to get the huge multiplier, then who would I pick? So we said that's for us, that's the fun question. Because at the mid-tier levels, like if you get into Series C, then how much do you get? It's a more complex finance question, and I don't do finance. So for me, it's just like get on the ground floor, and like, it's like a lottery ticket. Yeah, that's why. Any other questions? A shy crowd today. Oh, we got a question.
So did you try the venture capital stuff also with real money, or?
Okay, so what happened was we write the paper, we put it in archive, and then somehow like it just leaked all over like the community, and I got emails from tons of like venture capital people. Actually, a guy contacted me from the firm that bought Nutanix. Like they were actually the funders of that company. So they asked me, what's your paper about? What are you doing? And that's where I learned like how the industry works, that they don't do anything quantitatively. And I think when they talked to me, they realized like, I have the paper online, and here's how you get the data. They're in the money-making business, so they can do it themselves, right? So they figured out. I don't know if they actually did it themselves, but I do know one of the VC we contacted actually paid my student for some consulting job with them. So he got some money out of it. But I never really actually built a fund based upon this because, I mean, I'm not an entrepreneurship person really, so I don't know all the details, and I might just get like cheated or something. And for me, it's just like a fun thing to show, is it possible? So I hope someone does it and then says they use my method, that'd be cool, but I'm not really the one going to be doing this. It's okay, I don't mind.
The testing is in sample or out sample.
Out of sample. Remember, no cheating, right? It's like you're the VC in 2011, and a company approaches you and says, would you give us some money, right? And you have to use all the data available up to that date. That's how it's operating. So all of it is out of sample. It's like no cheating.
So you didn't train your parameters with the data of 2011?
Yeah, so in the 2011 game, right, the data comes from 2011, January 1st and before, and just that data. Yep, so no cheating. A real VC could have done that. Like I could have done that in 2011. I missed the boat, you know. I had a question up here, I thought. No? Oh, wait, one over there.
It's asking, so you try to maximize the probability of choosing a company that exit.
A winner, yes.
Yeah, but so you get a point that's a maximum point. Have you tried the second maximum?
What do you mean second maximum?
So
the points of portfolio, you mean?
So you use 100 starting points.
Oh, for the model estimation.
Cost ruler, yes.
Yeah, so we didn't check the second best point, how good it does. Like if you study all the stuff in like AI, neural networks, right? They just like run the optimization, it's non-convex, they get somewhere and they pick that. They don't like check the other things around it. So we went with that approach. My sense is maybe if we pick the second best point, it might do similar, but I can't say for sure what happened.
We're just interested because thinking of whether the optimization problem is like, it's concave.
Yeah, if you look at that likelihood function, it's kind of ugly. So my sense is there might be like multiple local maxima. And actually, it's kind of easy to understand how that could happen. Because you could fit the data by saying make the volatility large and the drift small. Or you could make the drift large and the volatility small. The region in the parameter space that could probably fit the data equally. So yeah, just like machine learning, right? There's multiple solutions, but you have to do something. So you just pick one and roll with it. But your question is very like common problem faced by machine learning. These are the best models are non-convex, right? The really powerful ones are like always like non-convex, and you just kind of cross your fingers and see what happens. So yeah, that's just. I mean, I'm sorry, that's life in this non-convex world, right?
And maybe will it be the case that like between 2 years your model change a lot? So the second year the model is totally different from the previous years.
Oh, like if I change the year. I think in our paper we had that those table of parameters and the features, they're actually pretty similar year to year for the most part. They're probably definitely different, right? It's different data, but the general trends, like the biggest thing was like previous success was a very predictive feature, right? So the nice thing about our model is that it just reproduced what a venture capitalist already knows. It just kind of like makes it more systematic. So They can look at 3 companies and pick a winner, right, with their gut instinct. I can look at 1,000 and give them like a ranking of like the top 20, and then they can look at the top 20 with their human instinct and like improve upon that. I think that'd be the way this would be used in practice if I were going to be using it in practice. Yep.
Thank you.
Do I got time for one more question or try to wrap it up?
Okay, it's my question, so you get back.
Okay, cool.
So the objective is probability of
Somebody winning.
somebody winning. Yeah. So but this is independent of how much you will invest in each
Yeah,
one of them.
so like I said, right, I'm not a finance person.
Sure,
so
sure.
The way I
But
view
have
the
you
problem was,
tried to do this? I mean, you have now your candidates.
Mhm.
As a second step, how much would you invest in each?
So the trick is to answer that question, I have to know how much I'm going to win, right? Now, how much do you get at IPO? Oh, it's hard to estimate, right? That's a really like, it could be 100x, could be 1,000x. So the return is like stochastic essentially, right? And then if you sat down and thought about that, then you could probably answer your question more precisely. And that'd be the way you'd approach it. But because of that difficulty, we didn't do it that way. We figured, you know what, for our purposes, just this is good enough. But to model, answer your question, you have to kind of model how much you're going to make when the company exits. And that's, yeah, I think if you have more expertise in that space, in entrepreneurship space, you can build that kind of model. And that'd probably be a good next step for this work. For me to sit down with a proper like entrepreneurship person and like say like, okay, how does the thing actually work? And let's get together and make a better model. But this kind of shows that at a first pass, there is a model that could work because the data has patterns in it. It's not all just noise. It's not Shark Tank. Okay. Any other? Oh, one more back there.
So you showed this graphs, right, where the random guys, the random venture capital guys were appearing. Did you actually check how much these guys made? So
We didn't check the
maybe-
amounts.
yeah.
I guess if they had IPOs, we could check how much the IPO made them. I guess if you have at least one winner, it's enough for like a successful year of investment. So the fact they have more than one is like pretty remarkable. And yeah, I don't know how much they made. But I guess if it's an IPO, we can check. If it's an acquisition, a lot of times that data is like not made public. So if it's an IPO, it's definitely they made a ton of money, like Nutanix or someone like that. But we didn't check for like those companies how much they made that year, how many IPOs they had. But that'd be a good thing to check for myself. So shame on me. I think is that time? Is there any more questions? Okay, thank you.